The miracle doctor won't be a kept man. My heart belongs ashore. Chapter 241. When the people recognized Kiran's voice, their faces fell. Onyx and his men were lying on the ground when they saw Kiran. Their eyes glimmered with hope as if they had seen their savior. Onyx quickly went up to him and said, "Mr. Kiran, I'm sorry for humiliating you." Kiran did not say a word. He looked up and saw that Neptune's Cove was mostly the same except for the stage and the arrogant new owner, Lauren. He looked at Onyx's men on the ground. Some were hurt, and some were paralyzed, but she did not kill them. He raised his eyebrows and frowned. Did she call him here on purpose to antagonize him? However, Lauren was not the woman who tried to assassinate him yesterday. Where did she get her courage from? Kiran slowly walked to the man who was paralyzed and helped reverse it. Suddenly, he could move freely again. The man stood up and yelled, "Kiran, we!" Kiran stopped him and told Onyx, "Gather the men who aren't injured and send those who are injured back to Xander Corporation. I'll take care of the rest." Onyx was relieved to see Kiran here. He sent the injured men back, but he stayed. Kiran looked at Lauren. Lauren smirked and said, "Mr. Kiran, is that all you've got? Are you too afraid?" "Shut up," Onyx roared. Lauren looked at the crowd and said, "Everyone saw it. You came here and did nothing but save those people. Is it because you're scared?" "That's because it's not your turn yet. You better count your blessings," Onyx said. "Now, is it my turn?" Lauren provoked Kiran on purpose. Onyx clenched his fist as he blamed himself. Kiran had to suffer from humiliation because of his incompetence. Kiran patted his shoulder and said, "Calm down. There's still plenty of time." Onyx was moved to tears by his words. He vowed to himself that he would train even harder after this. Kiran looked at Lauren and said, "Just bring me your leader. You're no match for me." Lauren frowned. "You've lost your mind." Whoosh! She ran toward Kiran and attacked him. She wanted him dead. Kiran stood in place as if he did not see her. Pluck, pluck, pluck! Suddenly, music from a harp was heard inside the place. Lauren's body froze. Her expression sank, and she looked inside. When the crowd heard it, they looked like they were enjoying it. Kiran's face fell. It was the opening of the Joyful Odyssey. During his 20 years in the mountains, the only instrument he learned was the harp, and the Joyful Odyssey was the only song he played. Back then, his master told him he should stop whatever he was doing if he heard this song. He did not understand why. He asked him repeatedly, but his master only told him shortly after he came down from the mountains. There were 7 levels to the Joyful Odyssey. First, free love. Second, dream. Third, innate love. Fourth, letting go. Fifth, peace. Sixth, freedom. And seventh, immortality. Every level seemed to be just a title, but it represented strength. Once someone mastered the 7 levels, they could rule the world. Kiran practiced for 20 years, but only reached the 2nd level, dream. From 3 plucks of the harp, Kiran could tell that the woman was above his level. Most importantly, he had to keep in mind his master's advice to stop whenever he heard the Joyful Odyssey. Kiran did not think that he would meet someone in Bayville who knew the Joyful Odyssey, nor did he expect someone to openly steal Neptune's Cove karaoke from him. Then, he squinted inside the place. Just then, the harp produced a beautiful sound again. It was the 1st level, free love. The harp sounded like an endless stream flowing down from the mountains. There seemed to be traces of love in the air while the music played, reaching deep within the crowd's emotions. Many people who came to enjoy the crazy nightlife began to feel a sudden rush of sorrow and comfort. It stirred up their emotions, and some even began to cry. It was free love. Like the name, it induced a free flow of love and emotion. Kiran stood there while he felt a surge of longing for his murdered family, love for Snow, and gratitude toward the Xander family, Margaret, Rain, Onyx, and the others. His heart was telling him to surrender. Kiran took a deep breath to control his emotions. Huff! Suddenly, the door of Neptune's Cove karaoke opened by itself, and a shadow flew toward Kiran. It was a harp. The crowd froze. Kiran jumped up, caught the harp, and landed on stage. There was already a stand for the harp on stage. He put the harp down. At that point, the harp was already playing the 2nd part. Dream. Kiran sat down and started playing too. Everyone was in awe. The Joyful Odyssey's dream played inside and outside the place. The people immersed in their emotions from the first part found themselves in grief. It was like the dam back holding their inner feelings had burst open, and it all came gushing out. Countless sad memories of their past ran through their minds, attacking their mind and soul. Someone even burst into tears and started sobbing uncontrollably. Even Onyx was filled with regret after working for the three families for 20 years. He covered his face with his hands and cried out loud. Kiran was even more curious to know who was inside Neptune's Cove karaoke. However, he dared not get distracted. It was a blind duel. If he got distracted, that meant he lost. After the second level, the harp was plucked 3 times inside. However, Kiran did not move. His master only taught him the second level, so he did not master the next 5. Kiran was silent, and so was the harp inside. He peeked inside, expecting someone to come out. Unfortunately, he could not see anyone. Lauren looked at Kiran and said, "Mr. Kiran, we're going to take Neptune's Cove karaoke now. Do you have any objections?" Onyx regained his composure and looked at Kiran. Kiran looked inside without answering his question. Lauren continued, "If you're too embarrassed to give it up just like that, we can compete in 7 days to see who wins. Each of us will bring 7 people. It will be a best out of 7 game. If you win, we'll return the place to you. If you lose, you'll give it to us." "Neptune's Cove karaoke is ours," Onyx said angrily. "Sure," Kiran said. Onyx was surprised. Lauren said to Kiran, "I admire your courage. I hope you don't regret your decision." Kiran nodded and got up. He squinted inside but could not stop thinking about his master's advice. A good man must know when to yield. The York family's revenge may be the most important thing, but Kiran was being cautious. Kiran turned around and stepped off the stage to leave. "Mr. Kiran, stop!" A woman ran out and shouted. Chapter 242. Kiran looked over immediately, but to his dismay, it was just an ordinary woman. Her strength was not even close to Lauren's, and she looked like a mere assistant. The woman walked over to him and handed him an envelope. "Mr. Kiran, this is for you." Kiran was shocked to see the words for Kiran's eyes only. The woman's handwriting was beautiful. From her handwriting alone, she seemed like the most beautiful woman in the world. Then he discovered something even more shocking. The envelope smelled the same as the woman who tried to assassinate him. Could it be her? Kiran looked inside Neptune's Cove karaoke, but it was quiet and deserted. "Mr. Kiran, our leader has asked you to take the harp with you and return it after 7 days." After she said that, one of the dancers from the stage carried the harp and presented it to him. Kiran was left with more questions. He took the harp and said, "I'll bring my people to fight in 7 days. It's not a fight. Our leader just wants to see if Mr. Kiran is reckless or a fool." The woman laughed. "What did you say?" Onyx shouted angrily. "I hope you're not a fool," the woman pointed at the harp. Onyx wanted to attack her, but Kiran stopped him. "I'll be there on time." Kiran turned and walked toward his car. He knew they were laughing at him for only being able to play 2 levels of the Joyful Odyssey. Onyx followed behind. Kiran and Onyx were going to return to Xander Corporation. However, they did not realize that Serena and Snow were in a car parked at the corner, watching everything. "Snow, it looks like the woman asked Kiran out?" Serena spat nonsense. Snow felt like something was off, but she pretended not to care. "It's a miracle that someone even wants him. Looking at him annoys me." Serena smiled sweetly. "If you don't want him, you can't give him away. Just give him to me." Then she stared into Snow's eyes. It must be a girl. She must have done something to make him hesitate. Otherwise, he would not just walk away like that. "What does that have to do with me? He can just run away with another woman," said Snow with a hint of sadness. "In that case, let's stay and watch what's so interesting about Neptune's Cove karaoke," Serena suggested. Snow did not object. She was worried about Kiran's safety. She was also curious about what was going on inside, so they sat in the car and watched. Neptune's Cove karaoke was open for business as usual, but people were only allowed outside, which they found strange. However, the harp was not heard again. The women watched for a long time. Just as they were about to leave, someone walked past them, making them unconscious. Lillian appeared in front of the 2 women with a smirk on her lips. Her gaze fell upon Snow and she said, "Take them away." People immediately came to take Snow and Serena away. Meanwhile, Kiran returned to Xander Corporation to treat Onyx and his men. Everyone had a dull expression, as too afraid to speak. Kiran did not say much, too. He just informed them that there would be an assessment tomorrow and 18 people would be selected to take the strength pill. Everyone hoped to work hard and get chosen as one of the 18 so they could return to Neptune's Cove karaoke and redeem themselves. Kiran returned to Snow's office, but she was not there, so he had the office to himself. He put the harp down as he could not wait to open the letter. There was a piece of paper inside, which turned out to be the harp score for the Joyful Odyssey. Kiran did not expect her to teach him how to play. He would be willing to give up 100 Neptune's Cove karaokes to get his hands on this. Chapter 243. Kiran found a stable position to place his harp and started playing. The opening of each level is the same, and only the rhythm changes after that. Kiran was even more surprised to see that it was the third level, Innate Love. After he finished playing, he felt as if he had just woken up from a dream of his entire life. There were moments of family, friendship, and love. He even met people he never met before in the dream. Kiran was ecstatic. He may have learned how to play it, but he had not mastered it yet. If it were that simple, he would have become immortal already. Knock, knock, knock! There was a knock on the door, so Kiran got up to open it. Frank was standing there with tears streaming down his face. Kiran realized that it was because of his music. "Mr. Kiran, what was that song you played just now?" Frank was holding back his longing for his master and the resentment he carried. "The Joyful Odyssey," Kiran responded. "The Joyful Odyssey is beautiful. It's like a beautiful dream," Frank mumbled while crying. Kiran nodded and said, "You're right, it was a dream." Frank fell silent. Beep. Kiran's phone sounded, breaking the silence. He picked it up to see that it was Starly calling. Kiran remembered he had asked her to hire someone to seduce Marshall, so he answered immediately. "Kiran, Marshall has lured the person I hired to a hotel. Do you want to come now?" Starly asked anxiously. "I'll be there," Kiran said. "Hurry up, don't let that man get away with it," Starly reminded. Kiran felt like something was off, but he did not ask. Before leaving, he was suddenly reminded of Quentin, the person who saved Blooming Group. He asked Frank, "Do you know Quentin Young?" "Quentin Young?" Frank's face changed. Suddenly, he looked like he was about to murder someone. "Come with me. We'll talk in the car." Kiran then led the way downstairs and Frank followed. When they got downstairs, they saw Onyx and his men training. It seemed like they wanted to redeem themselves after the humiliation. Kiran was pleased to see that. As soon as he started the car, Frank asked impatiently, "Mr. Kiran, how do you know Quentin? Was he the one who killed your master?" Kiran asked. Frank gritted his teeth. He nodded and said, "Yes, he's my master's younger brother. He was the one who led everyone to attack and murder him." There was a slight change in Kiran's expression, but he spoke objectively. "He must be good at medicine, right?" Frank nodded. "Yes, he's very skilled." Kiran understood why he was able to solve the problem with the cream. "Mr. Kiran, how did you find out about him?" Frank was wary and afraid that Kiran might have some connection with him. Kiran then explained the problem with the blooming cream to him. "Oomph," Frank snorted. "That's not surprising at all. He would kill his own father if someone paid him to. When we get to Bayville Hotel, don't say anything. Just listen and figure out how to counter Quentin's solution. Do you understand?" Kiran told him. Frank immediately understood. He firmly nodded and said, "Leave it to me, Mr. Kiran." Then Kiran sped up. 15 minutes later, Kiran and Frank reached Bayville Hotel. Starly was waiting outside, but she could not get a hold of Serena, so Kiran was her only hope. On seeing Kiran arrive, Starly immediately went up to him and hugged his arm. She said, "Kiran, you're finally here. Quick, go in." Kiran did not push her away. He looked at the front desk as he walked over and said, "Give me the room key." The receptionist was a little disconcerted to see him as he was the person who slept with their CEO. When they heard that he wanted the room key, they were shocked. Chapter 244. He asked for the room key to the CEO's room, yet he brought another woman with him. Were his needs not satisfied because of her illness? Even then, he should not bring another woman to her room. Kiran saw that the receptionist did not move and realized he had not specified the room. He turned to look at Starly and asked, "Which room key do you want?" "Room 333, Starly said quickly. "Huff!" The receptionist heaved a sigh of relief. He was not asking for the key to the CEO's room after all. The receptionist quickly handed him the key to room 333, and Kiran went up with Starley. The receptionist nervously watched the three of them go up. There was already a man and a woman inside. Why were the three of them entering too? What was going on? The receptionist's imagination ran wild. No way. He immediately called Yvonne. She was resting in her room. Her body had been feeling much better, and her mental state had improved too. When her phone rang, she picked it up immediately. "Yes, Miss Yvonne, we have a problem," the receptionist stuttered. "What's wrong?" Yvonne frowned. "Kiran went into room 333 with a woman. There's... beep." Before he could finish, Yvonne hung up. Yvonne's face darkened. What was he trying to do? Even if he had a grudge against her family, he must have felt something when he saw her naked, right? If he wanted to spend the night with a woman, why did he have to come to Bayville Hotel when there were so many other hotels in Bayville? Was he insane, or was he trying to provoke her on purpose? Yvonne walked to room 333 angrily. In room 333, Marshall looked relaxed in his large nightgown. He sipped from the glass of red wine and looked at Crystal. "Did you bring your nurse uniform?" "I like it when you wear your nurse uniform, so put it on later." Crystal's heart was in her mouth. When she learned that Serena and Starley were tricking Marshall, she volunteered to help, hoping that Kiran would forgive her. She did not expect to find herself in a wolf's den. Marshall and Crystal met at the hospital. Marshall ignored Lily's injuries at first, but he thought that he should at least show up since she was his woman anyway. When he got to the hospital to check on her, he was prepared to give her some money and send her on her way if she were permanently disabled. However, when Serena took Lily away, Crystal got her chance to seduce him. Marshall was a bad guy, and Crystal was a pretty girl. She was also exceptionally curvy, which would make any guy swoon. Plus, she was wearing a nurse's uniform. Marshall was instantly attracted to her, so he made a move. The wolf attacked. Crystal baited him with her seductive charm, which aroused desire in Marshall. That was how they got here. Crystal knew that Starley was secretly following them and reporting their whereabouts, so she was calm at first. To delay, she made him take a bath after coming in. Now, Marshall had taken a bath and was ready to do the deed. Crystal was at a loss. She had been waiting for Starley and Serena, but they had yet to show up. She started panicking, worried that he might do something to her. Marshall saw her flustered face and figured that she was a virgin, which made him even more hungry for her. He grabbed Crystal's hand. "I'm single now. If you stay with me, you won't have to take care of patients at the hospital anymore." Crystal was so frightened that she wanted to withdraw her hand. Marshall was not pleased to see that, but did not act rashly. He put down his glass and took out a check from the clothes hanging in the closet. He slammed it on the table and said, "Write yourself how much you want." Crystal was trembling in fear and filled with contempt for him. She would not accept his money. She belonged to Kiran. Marshall was angered at her inaction. He frowned at her and said, "Did you not hear me?" Seeing as no one was there to save her, she was now scared. She could only rely on herself, so she said to him, It's that time of the month, so I can't." When Marshall heard that, his face turned gloomy. He was disappointed and annoyed, but there was no turning back for him. He told her, "You made the choice, so don't waste my time." "Mr. Marshall, you can have any woman you want. How about you find someone else?" Crystal tried to negotiate with him. "Stop wasting time! Splash!" Marshall splashed the wine all over her face. "Ah!" Crystal screamed. Her entire upper body was soaked in wine. Marshall's desire was uncontrollable. He looked at Crystal and said, "You seduced me first, and you said yes to coming here with me, so don't regret your decisions now." Crystal started to panic. "Mr. Marshall, you're an important person. Please, Don. I don't want anyone else. I just want you," Marshall shouted. He opened his arms and ran toward her. Crystal wanted to dodge him, but tripped and fell on the sofa. Marshall pounced on her like a hungry wolf, pressing her down. Crystal was terrified. She shouted at the door, "Help! Scream all you want. There's no point shouting. This is my private room. I'm a very important person here. No one will come to save you." Marshall laughed proudly. Crystal's mind went blank. Was she about to lose her virginity? How could she face Kiran after this? She continued shouting, "Starley, Serena, save me!" More women? Even better. We can all have fun. Ha ha. Marshall laughed like a savage. Kiran and the others were already at the door. Kiran heard everything, so he kicked the door down in anger. Marshall stopped in the middle of tearing her clothes off. When Crystal saw Kiran, she mustered the strength to push Marshall away. "Kiran, save me," she cried. Marshall was shocked to see him, but he calmed himself and said, "Kiran, is she your woman?" Kiran shook his head. "This is my room. Since you broke into my private property, I'll call the cops," said Marshall after Kiran denied it. "Call the cops," Kiran scoffed. "What?" Marshall scoffed. "If you call the police later, there'll be more evidence for them," said Kiran. "What are you going to do?" Marshall had a bad feeling about this. "Beat you up." His mouth and hands moved at the same time. Then there was screaming. Chapter 245. "Ah!" Marshall screamed and held his red, swollen cheeks. Blood seeped from the corners of his mouth as he looked at Kiran in fear. Kiran got some tissue to wipe his hands before throwing it on the coffee table. "If you call the police and tell them I beat you up, wouldn't they have much more evidence now?" "Kiran, you... Marshall had a twisted expression. He appeared fierce, but dared not be too arrogant, let alone call the police. The sight of Kiran frightened him. He was worried that he would beat him to death if he called the police. "Kiran, call the police! I recorded it on my phone. I have evidence of him molesting me." Crystal leaned into Kiran's arms. She looked furious. Marshall went pale when he heard they would call the police. He immediately pleaded, Don't call the police." "Marshall, why are you taking back your words? Weren't you going to call the police just now?" Crystal asked angrily now that she had backup. Marshall was so scared he started praying. He shook his head repeatedly and said, "I was wrong. I'm not a man. Don't call the police." "Starley, Crystal, wait outside," said Kiran. Both looked at Kiran. They wanted to stay, but they obeyed his orders anyway. "Shut the door," Kiran ordered. When Frank walked over to close the door, Kiran saw Yvonne out of the corner of his eye, but ignored her. There were 3 people left in the room now. Marshall was even more frightened. He could feel a chill down his spine when he remembered how brutal Kiran could be. He was scared for his life. "How did you solve the problem with the blooming cream?" Kiran got straight to the point. Marshall thought Kiran wanted to acquire blooming group, so he suddenly broke into a cold sweat. "Mr. Kiran, don't buy out blooming group." "That's not what I asked," Kiran reminded him. Marshall nodded repeatedly and said, "I know, I'm just telling you not to." Kiran frowned. Marshall explained, "To be honest, the Simmons family is merely guarding blooming group. We only have the rights over some of the management and funds. It's not entirely ours, so we did not solve the blooming cream problem. The real backer did." "Real backer?" Kiran was surprised. Marshall nodded. "I don't know who the backer is either. I just did everything my father told me to do." "It's the same with the blooming cream. The backer hired a man named Quentin Young to solve it. He didn't even show up. He just took the sample, gave us the formula, and it was solved." Kiran raised his eyebrows. There were so many powerful people in hiding in Bayville. Not everything was as it seemed. He never would have imagined that even Blooming Group would have such a powerful backer. He glanced at Frank, who looked solemn, as if he never saw it coming too. Kiran did not ask much about the School of Medicine before, but he assumed it was not a publicly known institution, so he wondered how they could have known about it. The backer must not be someone ordinary. Marshall did not know what Kiran was thinking, so he said, "Mr. Kiran, the Simmons family is just a working family in Bayville. Our salary may be higher, and we may spend a lot of money, but the real money belongs to someone else." "Does your father know who the backer is?" Kiran asked. Marshall nodded at first, but he immediately shook his head after. "Is that a yes or a no?" Kiran asked. "I don't think he knows." Marshall trembled and blurted out. "Why not?" Kiran asked a follow-up question. "Our family is not on their level. Everything we have right now was gifted to us by others. $1 billion company is nothing to them. Why would they tell my father their identity?" Marshall stated his reasoning. Kiran asked solemnly, "Why are they backing you?" I think it has to do with Dragon's Mount's research," Marshall stuttered. "What's there in Dragon's Mount?" Kiran asked. Marshall shook his head. "That I really don't know. Only my father knows, but he never told me. Kiran was now convinced that Lily was not lying. Only Zachary Simmons, Marshall's father, seemed to know the big family's secret. Not only that, but he seemed to know many of Dragonsmount's secrets, which was what helped grow their fortune. "Marshall, I'm not satisfied with your answers. If you don't give me more information, I'll get mad," Kiran pressured him. Marshall sweated profusely. It started dripping down his forehead, but he dared not wipe it away. Kiran's gaze was like laser beams that could kill him any second. After giving it some thought, his eyes lit up. He looked at Kiran and said, "In 10 days, my father will go on a month-long trip to research Dragonsmount. If you want to know more, you can follow him secretly. You might find out something." Kiran remembered Lily mentioning that he would go into the mountains for a month every year, and then come back with a thesis. Perhaps it was a good chance. He hid his excitement and stared at Marshall coldly. "You know what to say and not to say about what happened today. If you dare do anything stupid, you know what will happen." Marshall understood. He groveled at Kiran's feet and said, "Don't worry, I won't tell a soul, not even my father." "I understand. I'll inform you beforehand," Marshall promised. "Let's go," Kiran said, walking out with Frank. Marshall plopped onto the ground, anguished. The Simmons family was being targeted by Kiran now. He could only save himself by doing what he says. He remembered Kiran saving his father for the first time. He did not think that he would have to repay him in such a tragic way. Marshall was filled with anger and guilt, but it was too late. When Kiran came out, he saw Yvonne, Starley, and Crystal outside. He looked at Starley and Crystal and said, "You can head back now." Crystal looked at Kiran pleadingly. "I forgive you," Kiran said. "Thank you, Kiran." Crystal felt like a little kid who just got candy. She almost threw herself in his arms. Kiran looked at Yvonne and said, "Go to your room. I need you to do something for me." Chapter 246. Do something for me. All of them had mixed reactions when they heard him say that. Frank went downstairs first. He did not want anything to do with this. Starley and Crystal exchanged resentful glances. Even if they were not as pretty as Yvonne, he could have 2 of them instead of 1. Was quantity not better than quality? Yvonne was going mad. Kiran always said stuff that would make people misunderstand. Then she recalled stripping naked in front of him just for him to help cure her illness. "Hurry up." Kiran was already walking away. Yvonne was startled. Starley and Crystal were so mad they wanted to cry. Was Kiran that desperate to have her? The 2 of them watched them go back to Yvonne's room before calling Serena. Sadly, her phone was powered off. However, they did not want to leave. They stayed in the car and waited to see when Kiran would leave. Kiran and Yvonne went to her room. Yvonne remained calm this time. She tried her best to control herself and her thoughts. She looked at Kiran and asked, "What are you going to do?" Kiran smirked. "What do you think?" Yvonne looked down at her body and was starting to get nervous. Kiran did not say anything. "Have you done it before?" Yvonne mustered up the courage to ask. "Plenty of times," Kiran said nonchalantly. Yvonne's heart sank. It seemed like Kiran had done it with Snow many times before. It's my first time. Can you be gentler?" Yvonne begged. "Gentle?" Kiran shook his head and added, "We're going to go at it hard." "Huh?" Yvonne gasped. "We'll do it from the back," said Kiran. Thump! Yvonne's legs went weak, and she fell onto the sofa. She looked at Kiran with a red face. She grabbed onto her clothes to control her nervousness. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" Kiran noticed her strange behavior and asked. Yvonne was speechless. How could he ask if she was okay after saying that? She dared not say it to his face, so she shook her head and said, I'm okay. It's just that my body may not be as physically strong as Snow's, so I can't take anything too rough." "What are you talking about?" Kiran asked, confused. Yvonne was stunned. She said, "Didn't you say you wanted to do it from the back and hard?" "Ha ha ha." Kiran burst out laughing. Yvonne stood there blankly, looking at Kiran with curiosity. Kiran said with a face of disbelief, What are you thinking about?" "I wanted to discuss Peace Pharmaceuticals with you." Peace Pharmaceuticals?" Yvonne blushed. She wanted to crawl into a hole and die. She misunderstood again. She gritted her teeth in hatred. Did he do it on purpose? She was embarrassed. "Now that we can't acquire Blooming Group, we will produce cosmetics and go up against them." Kiran explained as if that did not just happen. Yvonne did not respond. She thought about pouncing on him and biting him to get her revenge. That jerk caused her to make a fool out of herself twice today. She was ready to accept him twice, yet she ended up being teased. It was incredibly humiliating. Kiran did not care about her lack of response. As for the research, I'll have Frank work with you. Yvonne's lips twitched. She nodded, but her heart was broken. Could he not see that she was upset? He did not care about her feelings at all. Kiran looked at the time and said, "It's getting late, so I have to get back. Peace Pharmaceuticals will be up and running tomorrow." When Kiran said he was leaving, there was an empty feeling in her heart. She longed to be with him. She looked at him with her beautiful eyes and asked, "Why don't you stay for a while? You can tell me what I should do." Kiran shook his head. "If you can't do this properly, you're not qualified to be a CEO. Yvonne had no words. "Even if you're sick, you can't be worse than my wife, right?" Kiran asked. The buttons on Yvonne's clothes almost burst open, and her heart burst into flames as she glared at him. "I'm not just a pretty face." "Surprise me, patient," Kiran responded calmly. Yvonne clenched her fists and gnashed her teeth again when she heard him call her patient again. Kiran was already leaving. Yvonne punched the air to vent her anger, but Kiran turned his head and saw everything. Yvonne was embarrassed once again. "Why do all women do this? If you're upset, just say it. Don't just punch the air behind my back." Kiran sighed. He opened the door and left. Yvonne stood in place with her heart in knots. After Kiran saw her, his words broke her heart. He was implying that Snow had the same reaction to him. How could she compare to Snow? She was his wife. If Snow's reaction meant that she loved him, what about her? "Just you wait, Kiran. I'll make you fall for me," Yvonne shouted angrily at the door. Creak. The door opened again. Kiran stood at the door and said calmly, "I forgot to remind you that you should cover up. Your body is still recovering." Yvonne stumbled and almost fell to the ground. She was on the verge of tears. Why did Kiran treat her like she was his nemesis? Kiran smiled a little. He could read Yvonne's mind. It was a pity he had a grudge against her family. Plus, he would never betray Snow. That mischievous woman was his one true love. When he realized that it was already midnight, he was in a rush to return home. He wanted to hug her to sleep because he was worried that she would not be able to sleep alone. After coming out of the room, he briefly told Frank to help Yvonne at Peace Pharmaceuticals tomorrow. He asked him to research cosmetics that could compete with blooming cream. Then he rushed back to Harold's villa. Starly and Crystal were hiding in the car in the dark. They looked at each other at the time. "It hasn't even been 10 minutes, they exclaimed. "Does he really have to take Viagra pills?" Crystal asked feebly. "I didn't think Snow would tire him out so much," said Starly resentfully. Both of them were disappointed. There was nothing left for them. When Kiran returned to the villa, the lights were already turned off. After a quick shower, he went into Snow's room. Snow was lying on the bed with her back to the door. It seemed like she had fallen asleep. Kiran took off his shoes and climbed into bed. Then he stretched his arms out to hug Snow. Chapter 247. Snow did not turn around when she heard Kiran come in. Instead, she frowned, and a murderous look appeared in her eyes. Kiran's arms wrapped around her. Snow grew tense, and her body stiffened. Kiran did not care. He hugged her even tighter. When his hand touched her arms, it calmed him down. However, Snow was still stiff. 1 second later, bang! Their fists collided. Kiran jumped out of bed and turned on the lights. Snow was wearing a white nightgown, and her hair was sexily untidy. She looked like Snow, but she seemed taller. She had a piercing gaze, too. It was an imposter. Kiran was certain. "Where's Snow?" Kiran asked coldly. "Keep your voice down," fake Snow responded. "You pretended to be Serena yesterday to assassinate me. Today you pretend to be Snow. What are you trying to do? Why won't you show me your face?" Kiran asked. "That's none of your business," fake Snow said calmly, tidying her nightgown. "I didn't think you'd have such a sweet, intimate relationship with your wife before getting your revenge. You seem to have a nice and comfortable life," fake Snow ridiculed him. "That's between me and Snow. It has nothing to do with you. Now, tell me, where's Snow?" Kiran's eyes were already seething with anger. Can you tell me how you know I'm not her? Fake Snow ignored his question and asked. Snow doesn't know how to fight. Her body is delicate. You're much more flexible than her. Only people who train in martial arts can do that, which means you're not her, Kiran explained. Ha! Fake Snow scoffed. You even notice such small differences, it seems like you know her well. Kiran did not know why the fake Snow was jealous. He said angrily, Don't waste my time and tell me where Snow is. Dead, Fake Snow said calmly. Do you have a death wish? Anger was flowing in his veins. Huh. I didn't think your wife would be so important to you. I remember you asking for a divorce. You even called her ugly. Why are you so in love with her now? Fake Snow sneered. That's between me and Snow. It has nothing to do with you. Tell me where she is right now. Kiran's voice was cold. I said she's dead. I'll burn her body. Am I not Snow too? Can't you just think of me as her? Fake Snow continued with a smile. Do you want me to kill you? Kiran's anger was uncontrollable now. You can't kill me. Fake Snow was calm in the face of Kiran's wrath. Kiran stared at Fake Snow and said, Don't think you can frighten me with level 3 of the Joyful Odyssey. How'd you know it's me? Even if I don't know level 3 of the Joyful Odyssey, you can't kill me. Otherwise, I would have died after that punch earlier, said Fake Snow. If I want to kill you, I'll do it for sure. Kiran sounded firm. Fine, but is fighting each other for Snow worth it? Fake Snow changed her tone. What do you want? Kiran asked, glowering at her. I want you to promise me one thing, Fake Snow said to him. Why should I make a promise to you when I don't know you? Kiran asked coldly. I haven't even said anything. Why are you refusing already? Fake Snow said. What is it? Kiran retorted. You're not allowed to have sex with Snow without my permission, Fake Snow said seriously. Kiran was stunned. He could not hold back his laughter. Why are you meddling in our business? That's my request. If you don't oblige, you won't see Snow again, Fake Snow said determinedly. Who are you? Kiran stared at her as if she was a psychopath for deciding when he could or could not do such a thing. I don't care if you hug her to sleep, but if you dare cross the line. I'll take her away from you forever. Do you understand? Fake Snow warned him. I refuse. Kiran would not accept being threatened. I knew you would, but my condition stays the same, she insisted. Kiran scowled at her. Meanwhile, she smiled with confidence. What are you trying to do? Kiran asked. You know the 7 levels of the Joyful Odyssey, right? Fake Snow asked Kiran. Yes. The first few levels are easy to learn, but the higher ones require 2 people to learn together. I've only reached the 4th level, and I need your help with the remaining 3, Fake Snow said to Kiran. Kiran froze. How am I supposed to help you? We'll talk again when you learn the 4th, Fake Snow said. What does that have to do with me sleeping with Snow? Kiran asked. Don't ask me why. That's just my request, Fake Snow persisted. If I learn all 7 levels, aren't you afraid that I'll kill you easily? Kiran asked. That's a problem for later. You don't have to worry about it now, Fake Snow refused to tell him. Is that all? Kiran asked her. Yes, that's all. If you do it, everything will be all right. If you don't, everyone you know will die, especially the person you sleep with. Fake Snow's eyes turned cold. What's your name? Kiran asked. You don't need to know. Just do as I say. Where's Snow? You sure do care a lot about her. Fake Snow sounded bitter. She opened the window and jumped out. When Kiran ran to the window, she was gone. He turned around and noticed the closet door was not completely closed, so he walked over and opened it. Then he saw Snow's beautiful round eyes staring at him. They had rendered her unable to move or speak by blocking her pressure points. Kiran quickly unblocked it. Snow was able to move, so she kicked her right leg into Kiran's crotch. Chapter 248. Snow's movements were swift and aggressive. Her white stiletto heels were like an unsheathed sword that could pierce Kiran's body with a single kick. Kiran spun and grabbed Snow's leg with his right hand while using his other hand to pull her into his arms. Snow was mad that she failed to kick him, so she bit his shoulder. Kiran could have dodged her, but Snow would have fallen face first to the ground if he did. Then, she would become an ugly woman. Of course, Kiran could not do that to her, so he did not dodge. Snow fell into his arms, which gave him a strange feeling. Then he felt a sharp pain in his shoulder. Snow had sunk her teeth into his shoulder, shaking her head ferociously as though trying to tear off a piece of flesh. Kiran would have broken their teeth if it were anyone else, but he could not do that to Snow. She was his wife, after all. Kiran had no choice but to endure the pain. Finally, he reluctantly lifted his hand to pat her on the shoulder. Suddenly, all the energy drained from her. Her body went limp and she fell to the ground. Kiran ignored the pain in his shoulder and quickly grabbed her around the waist as if carrying the most noble princess in the world. "Let go," Snow shouted angrily. "Honey, are your teeth broken?" Kiran teased, even though he felt like a piece of flesh had been ripped off his shoulder. "My teeth aren't broken." Snow gritted her teeth. She wanted to say she was heartbroken. Just now, she clearly heard Kiran promise the stranger that he would not sleep with her without her permission. Did that mean he was going to sleep with that woman instead? She was his wife. They had hugged and kissed each other. They even slept on the same bed. She was just one step away from being 100% his wife. How could Kiran agree to the strange woman's request when they were husband and wife? Was she nothing to him? That was why Snow crazily bit him. However, Kiran did not know that. He thought that Snow was just mad that she was held captive by that woman and wanted to vent her anger on him. "Where does it hurt?" "I'll help you treat it." Kiran's innocent, caring look made Snow's heart ache even more. She asked him fiercely, "Who was that woman?" Kiran froze and immediately understood what was going on. He laughed. "How dare you laugh?" Snow stood up and was about to hit him again, but Kiran pulled her close against his body. There was a look of horror on Snow's face. She put her hands up to stop him and shouted, "Son of a bitch." Then Kiran pressed his lips against hers, muffling her voice. Kiran pulled away and smiled at her. "I thought you were heartbroken, so I'm healing you." You... Snow was both ashamed and angry. "I don't know who that woman is either, but she was the one who pretended to be Serena to assassinate me last night. She also led those people to take Neptune's Cove karaoke away from us." Kiran explained everything to her. Snow snorted and stared at him. She pretended to still be angry and said, "Why is she targeting you? What is the Joyful Odyssey anyway?" "The Joyful Odyssey is a song to be played on a harp. As for why she's targeting me, I have no clue," Kiran said. "I heard the song earlier, but I've never heard it before. How do you know how to play it?" She recalled Kiran playing the harp with someone outside Neptune's Cove karaoke. They were in perfect harmony, and that made her jealous. "You were at Neptune's Cove karaoke? Is that where they kidnapped you?" Kiran asked suddenly. "Don't change the subject." "How do you know how to play the Joyful Odyssey?" Snow retorted. "My master taught me, but I only know how to play the first 2 levels. I don't know the rest," Kiran answered truthfully. "It's a good thing you don't know. You can just practice with her. Both of you are a great match," Snow pouted. "Pfff." Snow's jealousy amused Kiran. He caressed her head and said, "If you don't believe me, let's sleep together now." Kiran only wanted to sleep with her after that woman told him not to. Snow roared angrily. "Go to hell." Snow struggled, wanting to beat him up further. Kiran had already run off to the side. He laughed and teased, "Honey, what are you afraid of? I'll take full responsibility." "Fuck off, jerk. Don't ever show your face again." Snow pointed at him. "Go to hell." Snow threw her white shoes at him. Kiran caught them and waved them in front of her. "Your feet smell." "You." Snow gripped her chest in anger. "Ha ha," Kiran ran out, laughing. Snow fumed while Kiran returned to his room. He opened the curtains to look outside. His heart was beating as he wondered who that woman was. Why did she show up in front of him, knowing that he would not kill her? Kiran was certain he could kill her if he wanted to, but his master told him to stop whenever he heard the song. What did he mean? Kiran had mixed feelings. Meanwhile, in a car outside the villa, Lillian put on her clothes and removed Snow's mask, revealing her beautiful and delicate face. There was a hint of confusion on her face. "Master, I've come to teach Kiran the Joyful Odyssey like you told me, but I don't know how far he can go." Lillian sighed. "Why is level 7 of the Joyful Odyssey so difficult? It's easy to play, but bringing out the magic in it is hard." She did not tell Kiran the truth. She had already mastered 6 levels and only had 1 level left to go. She looked toward the villa and muttered, "Kiran, don't you disappoint me, or else you'll regret it." "Humph." Lillian snorted. "I will never marry a jerk like you. You've even hugged, kissed, and slept in the same bed with another woman. The thought of you makes me sick." Lillian's face was full of disgust, as if she had just seen the most repulsive thing in the world. She even took a wet wipe to clean the part of her arm where Kiran touched. 10 minutes later, Lillian started the car and left the place. Then there was a knock on Kiran's, so he turned to look. Chapter 249. "Come in," Kiran said. Creak. The door opened, and Kiran saw Serena standing there in sexy, see-through black lingerie. Under the lights in his room, the contrast of black and her fair skin was even more eye-catching, especially her exposed calves. They were slender, without a trace of excess fat. It was a work of art. She had the face of an angel and the body of a devil. She was even more alluring than Snow. However, Kiran seemed immune to her, so he calmly asked, "Are you here to apologize because you failed to protect Snow?" "Paft!" Serena covered her mouth and laughed. "I knew you could tell. I don't blame you. You're no match for her," Kiran said frankly. "Who is she?" Serena asked seriously. "I don't know." Kiran frowned and shook his head. "Can you beat her?" Serena looked concerned. "If I wanted someone dead, they'd be dead," Kiran said with overbearing confidence. "Clap." Serena clasped her palms and said, "My man is so manly." Kiran rolled his eyes at her bullshit. "Are you going to kill that beautiful woman?" Serena asked, changing her tone. Kiran's face changed. He raised his eyebrows and stared at Serena. "I'm being serious. I bet she's very pretty." Serena smiled at him. "I'm not attracted to anyone other than Snow. Plus, I'm focusing on avenging my family, not love." Kiran sounded cold. "Looks like I have no chance then." Serena looked disappointed. Kiran did not answer, but she knew that meant yes. Serena then said, "I don't think that woman has any ill intentions toward you. Maybe she just has a crush on you." "Other than all of you, I don't know any other woman," Kiran said frankly. "Who knows? Maybe you're secretly engaged." Serena smirked. "Why are you here? If you have nothing to say, go back to bed." Kiran did not want to waste time on Serena. "I came here because I have something to tell you." Serena became serious again. Kiran nodded. "What is it?" Serena held the edge of the bed with both her hands and looked at him seductively. "You can spank me now." Kiran was speechless. Did she come in here in the middle of the night for that? Was that the serious business she had to discuss? He was going to cough up blood at this point. Serena looked at him in anticipation, and she said softly, "Kiran, I'm going to bed." Kiran ran out of his room and went to Snow's room. He dared not spank her. What if she made a sound, and the entire villa heard it? If he did it one time, he would have to do it again and again. Then, she would never leave him alone. Serena looked disappointed, but she stood up and said, smiling, "Kiran is still an innocent boy. If you want to compete with me for Kiran, you're going to have to step up your game." Serena smiled as she walked back to her room. Not only did she go to him to ask him about Lillian, but she was trying to get closer to him too. Kiran might reject her now, but he would warm up to her eventually. Kiran entered Snow's room. She was not asleep because she was not used to sleeping alone. When she heard the door open, she bolted upright and asked, "Who is it?" "It's me." Kiran was already getting into bed. "Go away." Before she could finish, Kiran was already hugging her. She wanted to break free, but Kiran whispered into her ear, "I think that woman has something to do with the York family's enemy, so I agreed to fight her next week. Our main focus right now is to build strength and deal with those people at Dragon's Mount in 2 days." Snow stopped struggling. She turned to face him and asked with worried eyes, "Is she very strong? Is she too strong for you?" Kiran shook his head. "Not necessarily, but I could sense we were in danger after she showed up." "What do you mean?" Snow asked. "We have too little manpower. I can't protect all of you while doing everything else myself. After the duel with Wolfgate, I'm afraid that there'll be even more powerful forces coming our way. When the time comes, how am I going to protect all of you?" Snow was silent. He was right. "Don't worry, I have a way to quickly build their strength," Kiran said quickly, not wanting Snow to worry. "Can Onyx and the others do it?" Snow asked. "We'll take it slow. Don't get hurt." Snow hugged him tightly like she was afraid of losing him. Kiran hugged her back so she could fall asleep peacefully in his arms. The next day, when Snow opened her eyes, Kiran was no longer in the room. She ran to his room, but he was not there either. "Kiran went out in the morning," Rain said, blushing. Snow was blushing too. Rain, did he say where he's going? Rain shook her head. Snow was worried but did not say more. She packed up and left to go to work. Meanwhile, Kiran was at Xander Corporation. Onyx and the others were training, and they seemed to be even more motivated after the shame they went through. Upon noticing Kiran, everyone stopped and looked at him with respect, waiting for his assessment. Kiran glanced at them. Everyone got injured yesterday, so if you feel your body is not in good condition for the assessment, you may postpone it. We're fine, Onyx shouted. His voice echoed throughout the compound. Everyone was full of anticipation and determination. Kiran was satisfied with their spirit. Even if they were weak, they must not lose their spirit. He looked at everyone proudly and said, "Remember my fourth requirement. No matter how strong you are, if you can't accomplish that, you won't be one of the 18 people." "Yes, sir," everyone shouted in unison. Kiran looked at Onyx. "Starting now, we will train intensively according to the training guide for 3 hours non-stop." Onyx and the others were shocked when they heard that. If they had to train for 3 hours, they would probably collapse from exhaustion. How were they going to be assessed after that? However, they obeyed Kiran. Kiran sat down and started the timer. "Mr. Kiran, are you testing their limits?" Frank came over and asked. "That's one of the factors," Kiran said calmly. He noticed that Frank seemed to be in much better condition. "What is it for then?" Frank wondered. When people reach their limit, they would be one moment away from death. At that time, the only thing keeping them going is their willpower. It's also when their true nature comes out. "Only then can we assess the good and evil of their human nature," Kiran said while looking at the sweaty people. Frank was silent. He was in awe of Kiran's way of thinking. Was that not the same method he used to cure him? How else would he have wholeheartedly accepted Kiran if not for his desperation? 3 hours passed in the blink of an eye. Onyx and his men were exhausted, but they still gathered in front of Kiran, waiting for the assessment. Chapter 250. Kiran looked at Onyx and his men and said, "Starting now, form your own teams. I want to see 18 teams in total." Everyone sprang into action, and 18 teams were formed in an instant. However, something was off. Some teams had more people, and some teams had fewer. The people who were injured yesterday were exhausted from the 3-hour training. They were not in good condition, so no one wanted them on their team. Onyx knew that Kiran was testing them, so he was shocked to see that happen. By letting them form their own teams, he could tell that some were very selfish. He looked at a team of only 4 and said, "Gavin, your team is too small. Add those 4 men to your team." That man was Gavin Fisher. He was tall, fair-skinned, and in his mid-20s. He seemed quiet and reserved. Gavin looked at the 3 around him, who seemed to be deep in thought. Clearly, they did not want others to join them. The 4 of them got along well. They even planned how they could become one of the 18 people together. When asked to form a team, they naturally got together. Gavin looked at Onyx and said, "Mr. Onyx, our team has been finalized. Can't you see you need more people?" Onyx yelled. Gavin looked uneasy. He did not want to add anyone else to the team. The air was tense. Onyx peeked at Kiran, who remained silent. At that moment, an equally muscular but honest-looking man said to Onyx, "Mr. Onyx, let them join our team." Kiran looked at the man who spoke. There were already 6 on their team. All 6 had minor injuries, and the training earlier had exhausted them. However, the remaining 5 members looked ready to welcome them into their team. Onyx was embarrassed by Gavin's behavior and wanted to tell him off. Then Kiran said, "Join them then." Onyx said to the honest-looking man, "Jacob Lynch, there are many of you, and you're all injured. The test is going to be difficult." "I know. Don't worry, Mr. Onyx," Jacob responded lightheartedly. Onyx admired his attitude. He looked at Kiran and asked seriously, "Mr. Kiran, what's the next test?" Everyone looked at him curiously, wondering what his next test would be. Kiran looked at the training grounds and said, "From now on you will train non-stop right here. 18 people will be selected from among those who last until the end." Everyone was stunned. They had just gone through 3 hours of intensive training. They were on the verge of collapse, but he still wanted them to continue. Would they cough up blood after this? Would they die of exhaustion? "Start now," Onyx commanded. "Yes, sir," everyone shouted through gritted teeth and started training. Kiran looked at the compound. With the strength pill as their goal, they persisted and moved quickly despite their tiredness. Kiran was satisfied to see them like this. This was the only way they could unleash their greatest potential. As time passed, some quit because they could not bear it anymore. Their teammates did not care about them quitting at all. It was as if they could not see them. Gavin's group of 4 was not injured. They were in perfect condition and way ahead of the others. When Kiran looked at Jacob's group, his eyes lit up. There were 10 in his group. All were injured, some more than others, but they all helped each other under Jacob's guidance. No one was left behind. Kiran started to have a good impression of Jacob from then on. Frank understood Kiran's intentions now and admired his method of selecting people. He was reminded of how Kiran trusted him and saved his life. In his eyes, Kiran was very wise. As time passed, even more people were eliminated. However, not a single one in Jacob's team was missing. They were still helping each other. Some of them had no strength left to cross some obstacles, so their team members even squat down to form a human ladder and help them cross. The people on the other side also formed a ladder to help the others down. Kiran felt emotional looking at that scene. The 4 in Gavin's team were still running despite being exhausted. However, they put themselves first without helping others and seemed to be hoping that others would fail. As for the other teams, only a few people were left. Some teams had been completely eliminated. After another 30 minutes, only 22 people left, so Kiran shouted, "Stop!" When everyone heard him shout, it was as if a heavy burden had been lifted off their shoulders. They collapsed to the ground, almost dying of exhaustion. Onyx wanted to command them to stand up, but Kiran stopped him. After a few minutes, they regained their strength and slowly got up. They looked at Kiran with joy as if they had won a prize. Kiran looked at the 10 in Jacob's group and declared, "All of you pass." Jacob and the others froze. Then they were ecstatic, shouting, "We did it!" The others looked envious, and they turned to Kiran expectantly. Kiran looked at Gavin and his members and said, "You 4 are eliminated." Gavin and the others were shocked. They could not accept it. "Mr. Kiran, all of us ran persistently without slowing. Why are we eliminated?" Onyx was shocked too. The 4 men in Gavin's team were his strongest and most capable. Why did Kiran not approve of them? "Do you remember the 4 points I mentioned before?" Kiran looked at them. "Yes, sir. We did not violate any rules, and 4 of us are still here. Not only are we united, but we're strong too." "United? Strong?" Kiran smiled and pointed at Jacob's team. "What about them?" "Them?" Gavin and the 3 men were embarrassed when they thought about how they rejected those people. However, Gavin was not happy with his decision. "Mr. Kiran, we rejected them not because we're selfish, but because we have our own way of cooperating." "He's right," said the others quickly. "I saw the way you worked together just now. You fought for yourselves, but the 10 were helping each other. That's what true teamwork is," said Kiran. "Mr. Kiran, I can't accept this. You made it clear that the strongest people would be selected. Why are you selecting weak people like them?" Gavin was frustrated. The other 3 expressed their dissatisfaction as well. "Weak people like them? They were injured at Neptune's Cove karaoke yesterday." Kiran smiled. "Doesn't that make them weak?" Gavin retorted. "That means that they sacrificed for all of you. They are not weak for wanting to take back what's theirs." Kiran raised his voice. The 4 of them had no words. Onyx realized that during the fight with Lauren, Jacob and the others risked their life fighting her without a second thought, which is why they were seriously injured. However, Gavin and the others stood back. Kiran looked at Gavin and the others and said,